you want to be comfortable and you want to have friends and you want to be like early days, being like short, being 5 feet tall.
He's made the world laugh for more than 50 years. He's played villains, wildcards, and lovable schemers, and somewhere along the way, he became one of the most recognizable faces in American entertainment. But behind the laughter, Danny Devito's life has never been simple. It's been shaped by a rare medical condition he's carried since birth, by decades of being underestimated, and by a career that almost didn't happen at all. Now, in his 80s, the man who built an empire out of being different is still working, still creating, and still living with the realities that fame never erased. This is the real story of Danny Devito. Daniel Michael Devito Jr. was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey, the youngest of 3 children in a working-class Italian-American family. His father ran a small pool hall and, at various points, other modest businesses around the Jersey Shore. It wasn't a glamorous upbringing, but it was tight-knit. Devito has spoken warmly over the years about growing up surrounded by family, describing a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and where he never felt alone, even when the world outside started treating him differently. That difference became clear early. Devito was born with a rare genetic disorder called multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, more commonly known as Fairbanks disease. It's a condition that affects how cartilage develops into bone, particularly at the growth plates in the arms and legs. As a result, Devito's bones stop lengthening earlier than they would for most people, leaving him at a final adult height of about 4 feet 10 inches. Unlike some more commonly known forms of dwarfism, Fairbanks disease doesn't shorten the torso, which is part of why Devito has often described himself as having a build that doesn't quite match typical expectations of a short person. It's also a condition associated with joint stiffness and a heightened risk of early arthritis, something that has quietly followed him through decades of physically demanding roles. He's rarely dwelled on the medical details in public. Instead, Devito has talked more about what it felt like growing up this way, in a place where, as he's put it, having a posse mattered more than height ever did. Nobody in his neighborhood dared to bully him for long. But outside that protective bubble, particularly once he entered the wider world of school dances, dating, and eventually Hollywood, his height became something he had to actively navigate rather than something people simply overlooked. By his own account, Devito wasn't a natural student, and acting wasn't even on his radar as a teenager. What he did have was ambition, and a stubborn refusal to be defined by how he looked. Before he ever stepped foot on a stage, he trained as a hairdresser and cosmetologist, eventually working in his sister's beauty salon. It's a detail that surprises a lot of people today, but it speaks to something important about Devito. Long before Hollywood, he was already comfortable being underestimated and using it to his advantage. It was during this period, while cutting hair and joking with clients, that his path shifted. He was encouraged to try acting, and in 1962 he enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, initially planning to study makeup rather than performance. During an audition exercise, something clicked. Teachers noticed a spark in him that had nothing to do with his height and everything to do with presence. He was offered a place in the acting program instead. New York in the 1960s was not kind to a short, unconventional-looking actor with no connections. Devito spent this period living modestly, sharing an apartment in Manhattan with a young, then unknown actor named Michael Douglas, the son of Hollywood legend Kirk Douglas. Neither of them had much money. It was a period of instant coffee, small rooms, and constant rejection, the kind of grinding uncertainty that most successful actors experience but few talk about honestly. Devito has described those years as formative, not because they were glamorous, but because they taught him patience and self-reliance long before anyone in Hollywood knew his name. Throughout the late 1960s and into the 1970s, Devito worked steadily but quietly, taking small stage roles, off-Broadway productions, and film parts that barely registered with audiences. Casting directors, then as now, often had rigid ideas about what a leading man or even a supporting character should look like, and Devito didn't fit the mold by conventional Hollywood standards. He has spoken candidly in later interviews about how his stature initially seemed like a disadvantage in an industry obsessed with appearance, and about the frustration of being passed over for parts he knew he could play. What changed things wasn't a single lucky break, but a slow accumulation of persistence. Devito began building a reputation in the New York theater scene, most notably starring in the original off-Broadway production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as Martini, a role he would later reprise on screen. That stage production became the seed of one of the most important relationships of his career. Years later, Michael Douglas, Devito's old roommate, became a producer on the film adaptation of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Devito was cast in the same role he had originated on stage, and the 1975 film went on to sweep the major Academy Awards, becoming one of only a handful of films in history to win Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Actress. Devito wasn't the star of that film, but it put him, at last, on Hollywood's radar. Even after Cuckoo's Nest, steady stardom didn't arrive overnight. Devito's genuine breakthrough came in 1978, when he was cast as Louis De Palma, the abrasive, foul-mouthed dispatcher on the sitcom Taxi. At the time, moving from film into a television sitcom was widely seen in the industry as a step down, even a risk to a serious acting career. Devito took the part anyway, betting that a great character was worth more than industry perception. The bet paid off. Louis De Palma became one of the most memorable sitcom characters of his era, a genuinely unpleasant man who audiences somehow couldn't stop watching. Devito's performance earned him both a Golden Globe and an Emmy Award, and the role cemented something important. Audiences didn't need him to be conventionally likable or physically imposing to be captivated by him. He had built an entire persona around subverting expectations, and it worked spectacularly. It was also during the Taxi years that Devito met Rhea Perlman, an actress who would go on to join the cast herself. The two married in 1982, and their relationship became one of the more enduring partnerships in Hollywood, built not just on romance but on shared creative work. Together they raised 3 children, and in 1983 they co-founded Jersey Films, a production company that would go on to have an outsized influence on American cinema, backing daring, unconventional projects that bigger studios were reluctant to touch, including a small, strange script by a then largely unknown filmmaker named Quentin Tarantino. That script became Pulp Fiction, one of the most influential films of the 1990s. While most of the public came to know Devito primarily as a performer, he quietly built one of the more respected directing careers of his generation. His 1987 directorial debut, Throw Mama from the Train, showed a filmmaker with a distinct, darkly comedic sensibility. He followed it with The War of the Roses in 1989, a bitter, blackly funny portrait of a marriage falling apart that became a cultural touchstone, and later with Hoffa in 1992, a more serious dramatic project about the labor leader Jimmy Hoffa, starring Jack Nicholson. Perhaps his most personally significant directing work came in 1996, when Devito directed and starred in Matilda, an adaptation of the beloved Roald Dahl novel, with Rhea Perlman playing his on-screen wife. The film has since become a multi-generational favorite, and it stands as one of the clearest examples of Devito's range, a performer capable of playing genuinely menacing characters while directing with warmth and care behind the camera. Around the same era, Devito took on one of his most physically demanding roles, playing the grotesque villain Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin, in Tim Burton's 1992 film Batman Returns. The role required hours of prosthetic makeup and physically punishing costume work, a preview of the kind of toll that decades of demanding physical performances would eventually take on a body already dealing with joint issues from his underlying medical condition. This is the part of Devito's story that gets less attention than the awards and the box office numbers. Multiple epiphyseal dysplasia doesn't just affect height. It carries a lifelong risk of joint pain and early-onset arthritis, particularly in the hips and knees, conditions that tend to worsen with age and are aggravated by physical strain. For an actor whose career often demanded stunts, physical comedy, and hours standing on set, that combination has meant managing chronic discomfort largely out of public view. Devito has generally been private about the day-to-day physical realities of his condition, choosing not to turn it into a public narrative of suffering. That restraint is itself telling. In an industry that often rewards actors for turning personal hardship into a marketable story, Devito mostly declined to do so, letting his performances speak instead. When he has discussed his height and his condition publicly, it's typically been with humor rather than self-pity, joking about being 5 feet short on a good day rather than framing his life as a tragedy. That doesn't mean the years haven't added up. Now in his 80s, Devito continues working at a pace that would be demanding for performers decades younger, still appearing as the chaotic, scheming Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a role he's played since joining the cast in 2006. The show has become the longest-running live-action comedy series in American television history, and Devito's willingness to commit fully to increasingly outrageous physical comedy on the series, well into his 70s and 80s, has become something of a running testament to his stamina, even as it likely comes at a real physical cost. Devito and Rhea Perlman's marriage lasted 3 decades before the couple separated in 2012. It was a quiet, largely dignified split, without the public acrimony that often accompanies celebrity separations. The two reportedly attempted reconciliation at points afterward before ultimately deciding to part ways for good, though they have continued to describe each other as close, and they never legally divorced. Their working relationship, through Jersey films and various shared creative projects over the decades, has continued in some form even after their romantic relationship changed. Their 3 children, Lucy, Grace, and Jake, have all worked in various corners of the entertainment industry themselves. It's an unusual arrangement by Hollywood standards, but it reflects something consistent in how Devito has approached his life, prioritizing loyalty and long relationships over convention, whether that meant staying with the Taxi cast when a bigger offer came along, sticking with Jersey films through decades of ups and downs, or maintaining a bond with Perlman long after their marriage in the traditional sense had ended. Turning 80 in November of 2024, Devito shows little sign of slowing down. He continues to act, continues to work behind the camera on production projects, and remains one of the most recognizable and beloved figures to come out of a generation of American film and television. His filmography now spans well over 100 credits across acting, directing, and producing, an output built entirely on refusing to accept the limits that an image-obsessed industry initially tried to place on him because of his height. What makes Devito's story genuinely sad isn't scandal or tragedy in the tabloid sense. It's something quieter. A man who has spent his whole life managing a body that,